Hi everyone, good afternoon. Another 0 to 1 event by Doers Circle. As you know, there are two 0 to 1 events a week that we organize, one on Wednesday and one on Thursday. And today, for the Thursday session, our speaker is Chadha. Charu is an independent consultant. I've had the pleasure of working with Charu together at Meta many years ago. And since then, Charu has ventured out as a consultant. As I posted earlier this week, in freelancing, you have different types of individuals or different shades, if you like. Some call themselves freelancers, some are consultants, some are contingent workers, some also call themselves as portfolio career professionals, and there are different versions, right? And from what I can see, Charu goes as a consultant, and I myself called myself a consultant many years ago when I used to do this type of work, and there are different types of engagement as a freelancer in these different capacities or in different versions of freelancing. So that's the topic for us today, but more in the consulting space, serving high impact projects and larger corporates and how to build a career, consulting career around that. So that's going to be our topic. Thank you very much, Charu, for accepting our invitation. And I'll let you share your screen and start the presentation. But if you don't mind, please do a quick intro of yourself as well.
So I think first off, thank you so much for inviting me today. I think I mean, the fact that I'm here is a sign of why your network is important. I knew Yasas in a previous life, and that brings me here. But really appreciate the opportunity, Yasas into a circle, for giving me a platform to share my journey. And I think the way I've constructed this conversation is to share a few things I've learned along the way, and more of a few mental models as you move away from a very structured corporate life into independent consulting and what that might mean for your profession or for your work life. A little bit about myself. Like Yasas mentioned, we were at Better together. So for about first 15 years of my career, I was in corporate roles, predominantly with global organizations, looking at very large regional portfolios, so Asia and Africa, emerging markets. And over the last 3 years, I've kind of moved away from a life where really somebody's built the path for me into kind of creating my own small practice of work. And what I'm really hoping this session did for me, and I hope it does for you, is to kind of reflect back and see what helped me build this up, for a couple of reasons, I think. And maybe that's the first thing to reflect on, right? Like, in an environment that we're in today, I think one of the questions a lot of people ask me is like, why would somebody even hire a consultant, right? Why wouldn't you just hire somebody who's in staff? There is just so much good talent going around. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I think one is a lot of large organizations are looking for advisors, and not essentially people who will do the implementation. There are new constructs that have come up for implementation, right? Whether it's outsourcing, whether it's vendors, so this very specialized way of implementing. But there's been an almost erosion of talent that was in the decision-making play, right? So you need people, you can have like a BCG or a McKinsey present you 10 options. This is what you can do in this situation. But really where they're looking for advice is around, so how do I make that decision? What are my considerations? And to that, is tied this other idea of independence, right? Like the person who's taking that decision should really not have a vested interest in it. So there's a lot of value in your independence is not being associated with either the person who's delivering it or the person or the entity that's presenting the options, or even organization itself, and it's what might be lots of conflicting opportunities within a large organization. So both of these, along with this idea of like response time, right? So who can I get on board really quickly? Who can I get on board in the next month? Who can do this for me from day one? And so both of those response times, how quickly you can come on board, but also how quickly you can answer their question. And these three together actually create a very interesting market for what's independent consultant, where you very much hired for your individual abilities and what you can deliver at that point. So and within that, I think a few things are packed, right? A lot of people going this way are senior to mid consultants or people who've had or built a career in corporates. They have been in these positions, right, in previous lives. And that's really the talent that's kind of moving in here and kind of trying to explore this. But as you kind of build this path around independent consulting, right, there are, I call them mental models because they helped me think through my transition. Is one, you also spoke about portfolio, and a lot of times we speak about portfolio work. But really, one of the reasons you might be making this transition is actually portfolio of life, right? Children, parents, hobbies, other aspirations in life, the kind of impact you want to have, what you want to be remembered for, your legacy. And this is sometimes much bigger than the binary that the corporate life presents us, right? And it's kind of really important to kind of unpack it. And as I'll speak later, why this unpacking becomes valuable, even as you think of yourself as a consultant. It's really a corporate, and we've heard this always, right? Like find the work-life balance. So it's always like these are two things and you need to balance them. But consultancy, especially independent consultancy, it's more of a, I think of it as a patchwork. Right, your corporate life might have, provide you financial support. It might have given you some kind of a reputation. It might be giving you your impact goals. But if you unpack all of these, right, they're in some ways all independent projects. You can pick up a project that helps you deliver on your impact. You can pick up a project that gives you the financial support you need. But at the same time, right, you want to build in things like learning new things or a passion project. I'm a great cook. I want to cook more. Built into this and create this almost expanded view of what portfolio looks like. But this mental model, right, of kind of shifting from what we think of this very linear, and it's very interesting in corporate life. If you think of all the words that are used to describe growth, they're all linear: trajectory, arc, ladder. And it kind of almost assumes, somehow the next step will appear before you. I think one of the biggest mental shifts is as you move to an independent consulting is your next step is not going to appear before you. So you almost need to build this, piece this together and be conscious of what you're adding. And as soon as you add something, right, how does this impact like this big picture that you're creating for yourself? I think the other piece really, and as you unpack your own career or your own experience, this idea of like, where is the value in this? Right? So I remember when I transitioned off, I was speaking to another colleague who had simply done something, and she said, I haven't actually done any work in the last 5 years. I've just been telling people what they should be doing. Because that's really what a lot of managers do. They tell other people what they should be doing versus actually sitting down and writing that memo or actually making that business plan. So there's almost at that level, right, between 15 to 20 years of experience, there's almost a sense of, what are my skills? Have they just like completely eroded? I can't remember the last time I actually made an Excel model. But the point is that is not where your value might be, right? Your value can be at many different places. It can be natural skills. You might be a, Excel whiz. It can be network, like the number of people you know. And there are different kinds of clientele out there for like different kinds of, what I call as value nodes. There might be, a startup that's really interested in knowing just how do you think about making a business plan. There might be a new organization that finds your brand valuable because you're recognized as an industry leader. In some other fields, for example, international accreditations, affiliations are essential if somebody's trying to enter a new market. So almost building on that, the earlier model of like a portfolio, it's if you unpack your experience, you'll also realize you actually have these different kinds of nodes, right? And because independent consultants are hired for like specific things, you have one project that can be very much about your skill. There can be another project that's just really about your network. And I think that's really how you build value, right? And you think of, okay, what's most valuable to this market and to this client, and where and how I can charge. And built in this concept is this idea of there isn't really a standard daily rate, or there isn't like a standard fee. All of these constructs will create different kinds of remunerations and also in some ways different kinds of value back to you, right? Like you might take up voluntary work because that aligns with certain other aspirations that you have. So important to I think unpack. I think corporate life is much more simpler because it's like almost a DNA. It winds it together. Uh, Consultancy is much wider, right? So you need to find your own colors within it. But on building on the same thing, right? Like as you open this up and you kind of look at everything that you have, there are going to be things that are high value today. There are going to be things that you want to build on, maybe because to stay relevant or because it kind of aligns with your aspirations. And there are things that are way down, right? Which are maybe things that are really things that you aspire for or things that you think are necessary for the market. Irrespective of why you think where they are or what skills you put in these three buckets, you will always have some construct of these three buckets within your experience set and your skill set. And it's kind of important to kind of do this consciously to say, okay, this today makes sense to me, this is what I need to work on, and this I don't need it maybe 3 years down the line. Because that kind of mapping, it kind of helps you assign value to it, right? I'd say, okay, this I will not do it below, X number. But this I'm going to learn so much, right? It's worth investing in, even if I do it on a voluntary purpose. And just talking about my own experience, right? My core experience is around policy, around capital allocation, and and I have a certain set of, like, I will not work with certain kind of brands. I will only work X, Y, Z. But things of interest, right? Technology, area of deep interest, something that moves so fast. You can only keep track if you're actually part of it. But not something I have enough time, honestly, like to do more consciously. So I volunteer because that gives me the flexibility to come in when I want. But it also just allows me to learn. And so it's an investment of time that I'm making to gain a skill that's kind of, I feel, relevant, maybe 2, 3, maybe if it's not relevant, it's just something of value to me, right? Because it's of interest to me. So think of your work and your skills, and this bucketing is really broad, right? It's not just for like someone like me. If you're from IT, right? Maybe coding today is relevant, but thinking about architecture is something completely different and something you probably need to learn. You weren't doing that much in day to day. Future might be something completely like it can be a new skill. Do you want to teach someone? But that what that is very individualized. But that it exists in this construct is more or less, I think, would apply to a lot of different people. And I think a little more deeper into two parts, I think, anchor and essence, because in some ways they create your financial pie. Future skills seldom give you money upfront. They're more to help you stay relevant in the market. But I think anchors, think of them as retainer projects. These are usually long term. They will always be built around your core value proposition, right? The work you know really well, what you're known for. And therefore, really important to be able to know what that is and be able to communicate that. Like I remember having a conversation with a friend who came from like 15, 20 years of sales. And his first thing was, I don't really know what I do. I mean, like, imagine somebody who can get into a room and sell anything. That's extremely valuable to a lot of organizations. But to be able to define that, to be able to put that together as a value proposition and pitch yourself, which is really hard, right? That's something they don't teach us in corporate, which is like, how do you explain why you're valuable? Um, but anchors are really about that, being able to understand what you're valuable at, what you're good at. It could be, it's not necessarily a skill, it could be a network. You know everybody in the space. So can you connect people who are trying to get into? Are you good at, say, opening up doors for others? They themselves in our roles and consultancies that are floated all the time. And then sense is just, one step away, right? These are probably short term, but they kind of help you build on things. Maybe your brand, maybe your network, maybe a new area, maybe a new geography, right? They're likely more volatile as compared to anchors, but essential because anchors will be extractive in the long run, right? These are projects that they will wind down value more than kind of add value, but they're essential from a monetary perspective. How you create the mix is completely up to you, right? If financial isn't that is important for you, maybe you build a portfolio that's just a sense. But that's really your call. I think it's more, I think the nudge here is to be more conscious about how you take on projects and what are the trade-offs that you accept. And with that, I think just the last bit around anchors, right? They seem the most attractive as a consultant. And I can say this personally, right? You want to get a project that looks just like your job. And because it kind of has the same value, like it has the same comfort level, it will not stretch you. They're but they have these unseen trade-offs that in the long run can be really problematic, right? So an anchor project will limit you sometimes on doing or working with organizations of similar kind. They will have lots of confidentiality requirements, very similar to an employee, right? Without the benefits of being an employee, like you will have limitations around representation, which is it is very unlikely one anchor will lead to another project because your ability to share information will be extremely restricted. They'll have very high time commitments. So they're really like that golden piece we all run after. But their impact on the bigger portfolio, not as apparent, right? So as you think of what you take on as an anchor project, I think it's also important to think of what its impact to your, that portfolio of life you wanted to create. Like, is it still going to take, am I still going to be away for 12 hours and not have time for everything else? Is how does it shape up in like 3 years down the line? Is it allowing you to get more projects? Is it helping you build your skill set, stay relevant? But but I think that's like essentially the trade-off or the balance that you need to strike. But I think much more considerations or much more thought should be given into as you think about building your anchor projects. After that, I have just a last one, which is more of a provocation to the group. Oh, sorry. It's really, to step back and kind of think of, and really, right, I think there are a couple of kinds of independent consulting, like Yasa said. You're sometimes quitting your job to do your passion thing. But sometimes, like me, you're trying to build a different kind of career. And this provocation is really for somebody who's similar in my steps. You're a marketing professional, but you want to do marketing plus something else, or you want to step out and do marketing in a different way. In that construct, right, where you're trying to build this as a profession, and not just like a stopgap or a passion project, then I would strongly encourage you to think of what that mix is, right? What is your anchor? What are your sense? What your future skills are? Because only together will it function as a profession. Because that I think is the other, and just as from his experience in Doer Circle would know better, right? I think the other challenge that when people come in is anchor projects actually come fast. But you don't know what you do after them because you get one and then you don't know where you're stuck, and you keep looking for the exact same next, which is actually really hard. And that's what creates that sense of instability, that sense of I don't know where I'm going, I don't know what's happening. And which is why this more intentional approach of kind of knowing, hey, this is where value is today, this is where it's going to be tomorrow, and this is, maybe what makes me happy. That kind of helps you think through why and, be more intentional about how you're building it. So with that, that's all I had to share. And I'll hand it back to Yasas.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charu. Maybe you can stop sharing. I had to apologize. I have a bad throat today, so still recovering from a sore throat. But thank you very much, Charu. Very nicely presented, I guess, and thoughtfully structured as well. I have a couple of questions. We have questions coming through the Q&A thread as well. Everyone joining, if you have more questions, please ask them in the Q&A thread. We will take them for discussion as we go. The first question I had, Charu, is this shift from a corporate to this consulting kind of life, right? Because you were a company that most people you wouldn't want to leave. I mean, some had to leave. I left Meta because not because I took the decision. It was a layoff on that day. 10,000 people got laid off, and I was one of them. But I don't think you were laid off in that fashion as a mass layoff, right? And you took the decision yourself to leave. And so my question, the first question really is like, how did you kind of prepare yourself to kind of shift from a very comfortable big tech job to a consulting environment where you don't necessarily have the same security maybe. You can't even say that anymore because given the layoffs that we saw, but at least at that time, right, in 2021, when you left, I guess there was a feeling of security and the benefits as well, right? And it's almost um, uncomparable in that sense, the benefits that some of these companies do offer. And I guess that's probably important to kind of discuss how did you mentally prepare to make this shift?
Yeah, so Very interestingly, actually, from Meta, I was a principal in a VC, so I was even in a much better role than I was at Meta. And the decision, like, actually, very much for me was a little personal. So I wanted to come back to Delhi, which is hometown for me, and I wanted to spend more time with my children. So I think one of the comforts a role at Meta or any other places gives you is it kind of gives you a little bit of financial buffer, right? You're not in that moment, you're not crunched. So I did. I think one thing to really clarify is when I made the move, I had the I had a little bit of bandwidth and to know that, hey, if this didn't work out for 2 years, this is not going to impact like my quality of life. It doesn't impact our future. So I think that definitely has a little bit of comfort. I think the other one that was really helpful in that shift, when I was moving out of Amitya was, um, and which is why that point to network is, somebody told me, if you can't do it, nobody else can do it. You know everybody who's anybody in this space. And that was a really important realization, right? That you'd spend a lot of time, what you thought were peers and colleagues, but you've never really consciously thought of them as network, right? Like if I picked up my phone and asked them for a favor, will they do it for me? You probably won't even do it, right? Like you're like, oh, I don't really want to ask my, like that person is my professional colleague. They're not like a friend that I will ask a favor. But really, it kind of turns out everybody is looking for people who can do work for them. So when you really call them up, and which is really what my first anchor project was, right? Was somebody I knew from 10 years ago, and I dropped her a LinkedIn message saying, hey, I'm exploring, and if you have any, if you're looking for anybody. And her conversation really was, hey, I've seen you grow in the last 10 years. Why don't you come on board and we'll figure it out? And that conversation actually gave me a lot of almost like faith in saying, okay, maybe I can do this. If she thinks I can do this, then maybe I can do this. So there was, I would say, a good almost a year of building that personal faith in saying if I made that effort to put myself out there, have those conversations, this will translate into work. I think the other thing which was more conscious, right, was to not look for equivalent of your job. Right. So, okay, I was doing X at Meta, I will only do that. Or I was doing Y at the, Amidya, which was the VC firm I used to work for, and I'll only do
Right.
that. I think that is a really big constraint, right? Like you've been like in a role, like you were at Meta, right? Like if you've been in a role, you have this comfort of 90% of the things just happen magically. Right? There's a system, there are processes, somebody will do it, there's somebody else out there whose job is to do like the paperwork or the grunt work of it. I think as a consultant, you do all of that. So I think that's
Yeah.
one other thing you have to kind of lower in saying, hey, I'm okay if I have to actually write this memo myself, or if I have to do this myself, because you're really the full company now. So all that 95% that was helping you be who you were at a Meta or an Amidya is now you. So I think that is the other piece, is really kind of lowering that, or bringing in that comfort and saying, I can still do what I did 10 years ago, right? At some point, you wrote those memos yourself, and then we reach somewhere else and we stop doing it.
Sure. Thank you, Charu. Actually, Ravi from Bangalore had asked exactly that question. How did you mentally prepare yourself to leave Meta and do this? I think that was my first question as well. Thank you, Ravi. I think we answered your question. I would like to pick this question from Nikita. It came a little later than the others, but I think it's suitable at this point in time. Charu, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I have one question. For someone starting out independent consulting, how should one go about scouting for potential work, and what strategy of sources would you recommend? I guess that's one question I also had. Because a lot of people would like this independence, right? I mean, it's flexible than working for a corporate. Of course, you are also letting go some of the benefits, but at the same time, you are also acquiring the flexibility that comes with it, and the opportunity to grow financially in a different way as well, because a corporate job has a limit. Whereas if you do 3, 4 projects, financially your capacity is higher potential. So a lot of people would like to do it as well. But how would you find clients is Nikita's question really.
Yeah, so I think two step to that. I think one, you have to explain what you do, which is really hard, right? Like saying I was a marketing professional isn't actually a pitch for a project. So you have to almost say, hey, I can help you grow this, or I can help you do this, or I can negotiate your vendors for you. So I think it's a little bit of like understanding what your value proposition is. Two, your first group of clients are always going to be people who know you, and they know you personally. You've worked with them in the past. So a lot of people, like I don't know where you're coming from, Nikita, but like if you had clients they are most in your role as a corporate, they are most likely to be your first set of customers or your potential clients. Because really, a lot of independent consultancy is built on personal brand, which more often than the influencer online brand is actually people's experience of working with you. Uh, and also, uh, this idea of people who know you well, who are they ready to refer you to? So it's going to be the first round is usually your first layer of interactions within your professional circle, right? People who know you well enough to trust your ability to do something. But they need to be able to fit you into a role, right? So that part of communicating what you do, that's on you. Because a lot of like, and I'm sure this is something Yesas has faced, right? If you have a background in public policy, it's impossible. Like, and you tell them I do public policy, and the first thing people ask you is like, what do you actually do? Like, what can like tangibly list me the skills you have? And that is important, right? Like what you did for Meta, why should it be relevant for like the next organization? And so that translation that requires a little bit of this introspection almost to say, okay, I could do this, I'm good at managing this, these are the kind of relationships I can bring in. That's been my experience.
Thank you, Charu. I also went through kind of decoding what we did at Meta in the outside world, right? Because there's a very specific title that you carry and very niche type work, but then you kind of decode as to what skills did it actually require you to have, right? And when I looked at mine, it was a lot of partnerships work and a lot of program management, a lot of stakeholder engagement, relationship management, right?
Exactly.
So while it's wrapped in a different way, you can also look at the skills that you developed and then you take those out either
Absolutely.
to a consulting world or to the next job, right? Like you move from one phase to another, but with your skills rather than the title itself.
Yes, absolutely.
Uh, Charu, one other question I had was actually this is something that I faced when I did consulting before I joined Meta. I was consulting for maybe a year and a half. I was a founder before that, and then we exited from that business, and then I was a consultant for maybe a year and a half, and then I joined a corporate. In that 1.5 to 2 year period, I had maybe 5 clients, and 3 of them did actually offer me a full-time job. This is back in 2017, 2018, and I didn't take them. As in, because that was not my intention. My intention was to see if I can grow a consulting career. And in fact, because I came from a startup background, I was actually interested in hiring a couple of people and actually building a consulting practice.
Yes.
But then the clients had different thoughts. Clients wanted me as an employee because they saw the value. They liked me. As you said, I also joined these companies because I had that network. They knew me, not that it came through a rigorous tender process or something, right? It came through because of the network. So after a couple of months, you are offered a full-time job. Now, I didn't take them, but I've had this kind of coming up when I talk to other consultants as well. Is this something that you've kind of come across that like people don't necessarily appreciate the consulting career in that sense, and they want a full-time employee in you?
Hmm. So two things. I think one, it depends on your personal aspiration. I know a couple of friends, right, who saw consulting as a stopgap to a role, right? So this was a perfect getaway. Okay, we're blind applying, nothing is happening. Let's start consulting, and that will lead to a role. And then that's the trajectory you want. That's well. I think the issue of staffing, it definitely comes up. I think it also comes up because at the end of the day, right, like traditional corporates aren't built on this advisory network, right? So there's always this, can I share this information with you? Are you accountable? What happens 2 years down the line? And these are all really valid questions, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but I think the challenge, and I don't know if you face this, is that one, are you ready to be logged into that role at that salary or whatever that construct that might mean for you? I think the other really, and this is my personal reflection, is in today's world, like a job feels a lot more scary than independent consult. Like you feel a lot out of control in a salaried role because it's really, I mean, there isn't really any logic to what's happening in the market, right? So I think those are my personal reflections to it. I mean, I can understand where they're coming from. I think at a certain point, confidentiality is a huge issue when you look at it from an independent consultant perspective. Right? Because what you're being asked to take decisions on, there are like, it affects people's strategy, it has revenue implications, it can go down in many directions. And that also caps really what you can do for an organization. At some point, you're like, if you tell me this, I will be able to do this better for you. But that information isn't available because you're outside the system. So I can completely see where it's coming in from. I think the two things that I've seen, I think one, I've been okay giving longer term commitments, right? For kind of setting this construct and saying, okay, so many years, but like these many number of days. The other really is actually much higher confidentiality conflict, like really strong contracts, which depends on which part of the world you're in. But I think see, at the end of the day, a lot of this work is personal. Like that's ground-based and independent consultancy. If you may not have known the person you're working for today, but they are offering you a staff role because they liked what you did for them in the past 6 months. So I think that piece does exist organizationally, giving that extra leeway to an independent consultant. Good contracts signal that up and saying, hey, this person's okay doing all of this. This person will do this. So it's about like creating your internal champion who will still advocate for you. But I would not put this as a binary, right? Like
Right.
for sure, for me, independent consultancy was a career choice because of bigger life choices. Uh, but I can totally see why other people would want to take on like the employer.
Right. And Charu, your interest is to do this independently as a solo consultant, and you don't have the intention of like having junior consultants, interns around you,
No.
that kind of no.
So interestingly, I think the question over here is my portfolio is very I have an anchor which is very traditional to what I do. I teach and I research, and I do a lot of volunteer work around tech companies, and for good reason volunteer because I have a few conflicts over there, but that spread allows me to be many things, right? It allows me a space to just think and be intellectualized about a profession I care a lot about. It allows me to learn in a certain way that I wasn't, right? If I look back at my role at Meta, I put all of these things together, right? But it didn't allow me to do, they didn't have external representation because you were under so much scrutiny as an employee that even if you said something in your personal capacity, you were just like, oh, Meta feels XYZ. So for me, having my voice was really important, right, as somebody coming from research. So this being this independent consultant, like kind of allows me to be me, and kind of share my opinion about, so a lot of my work kind of revolves around technology and society, right? Without institutional challenges, right? It does not need to be the opinion of one of my clients. This is mine. And that
Right.
independence is really what this construct gives me. Now, great amount of intellectual freedom, great amount of like research and network freedom. Not to say there aren't trade-offs. I mean, we all have those days where we're like, maybe I should just take this offer and get done with it, right?
Right. One question related to that, the previous question I asked is coming from a participant, Charu. Did you think of creating a brand? I think you probably have answered that in a way, but I'll still ask, like, did you ever think of like creating like a Charu Consulting Services kind of brand?
Not so much, but I think there's definitely in consultancy something called personal brand, which is, so I have again, not a friend, but a senior colleague, and she said, hey, if she's on a proposal, then that grant will always go through, because she has a personal brand of accountability, right? Like somebody who's been in the system for 30 years. If she say this works, it works. So I think there are many versions of what a brand is. I do hope someday I create a personal brand that's as valuable as hers. But I think don't think of brand only as an organization. I think today more than ever, personal brands are way more powerful.
Right. Ravi from Bangalore has asked another question. I think we have answered that. What type of services do you offer? Charu, I think you have touched on it, but I'm happy if you want to touch quickly on that too.
Sure. So very traditional, I think very much what I've done all my life, which is I help organizations mostly in the philanthropic space think about capital allocation, which is how do you help whatever strategy that you've developed globally implement it within the region. So give out grants, do measurement, impact, those kinds of analysis.
Sure. And there's a question coming through the chat thread from Purushottama. Is there a need to stick to anchor only or accents only? I guess he's also using your terminology here. Or toggling is required for a powerful portfolio.
So I wouldn't recommend only anchors. And this is my personal experience, right? Anything that's only anchors is really based on your core skill set. One thing we know for today's market is your core skill set is not valuable tomorrow because organizations are changing, their needs are changing. I ideally create a mix between anchor and essence. That balance is actually very much a financial balance in the kind of, what might be your financial requirements from this work. But only anchor is a great pathway if you're trying to go into staffing, right? This is the role somebody will hire you for today. This is not the work or project that will get you the next project.
Right. Charu, the next question is around training. If I broaden this question a bit, I guess the question here is, do you get training? But if we kind of remind our corporate careers before, Charu, we had a system, right? Like there was a career path, there was a system in place, there was some kind of mentoring. You had one-on-ones with your
Yeah.
managers, and then there was obviously training for your career development, skills development, and then there were sessions for you to kind of keep up to speed with what's going on
Yes.
around the world or in that space for that matter. Do you kind of miss that, or how do you kind of bridge that I guess deficit in that sense?
Yeah, and honestly, as a consultant, that deficit is bigger, right? Like one of the things corporate gives you is an environment to learn from. You will meet people, you will know what's the latest that's happening. And as a consultant, you essentially miss that ecosystem, right?
Yeah,
That was nurturing you.
yeah,
And that's, I think when I was talking about like that portfolio of life model, I think that's essentially what I was saying. Upskilling is actually on you. Right. Which is why if you consciously think of, hey, what are my future skills? What do I need to learn? Uh, but open up what learning means, right? Learning is not just getting a new course.
mm,
Does it mean doing new kinds of work? Maybe just as a volunteer. Does it mean reading? Does it mean showing up for like events and workshops and kind of listening to other people and what's happening? So I think learning needs to be broader. It's definitely something you have to invest in. More so, right? So in the domain I'm in as technology, I think you're irrelevant the next day if you don't pick up the paper today. It's just that fast, right? And I would imagine most careers are moving that fast.
right,
So definitely double down on learning, but a more expanded, right? Like not course after course or structured. Like I haven't taken a break to study. I think if that's the question that was being asked, but I have been more conscious in saying, okay, I have to keep learning. So one of the things, for example, just on that learning piece, is earlier this year joined as the Perplexity Business Fellow, and a lot of that commitment, or just the drive to why should I apply, write that long paper, why are they asking me
right,
these questions now at this age, was really from coming from the point of saying, hey, I'm not learning as much about AI as I want to, given the work I do, and I have to make this extra effort, right, to be part of this, additional or like it doesn't the fellowship doesn't impact my day to day. My client doesn't really care,
right,
but it has to be important to me if I have to be relevant.
right. I remember, Charu, when I spoke to you maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, I guess catching up after a long time, I think we had this conversation about career growth. Like, would this consulting practice would also mean that your career growth would slow down in certain
Yeah.
ways, and would you be able to come back to a corporate job at one point in time if you ever wish to, right? I guess that's another thing that I see when I talk to consultants. At Dual Circle, we do work with lots of freelancers, consultants, and founders in different environments, and I do have such conversations all the time. And if I may add something here, I think if the learning was continued and you were still growing your skills and were dealing with projects that actually require thought in that sense and there was impact, you could always come back. right? Because that 2 years or 3 years or 5 years is not a gap in your career. It's another 5 years where you've actually achieved a lot of high impact work. You've also grown, you've also
Yeah.
learned, and then you've also networked. And this network is very different to a corporate network, right? Because when you work in a corporate, yes, you have a strong network, but for most people, it's internal network. Of course, in
Yes.
some roles like yours or mine, we did externally interface, so we had external network as well. But for most corporate jobs, it's internal network. Whereas as a consultant, you are also growing your external network heavily
Absolutely.
and seriously, right? So in that sense, as I was talking to you the other day, I don't think it limits someone in that sense. It's a definitely a career path on its own if someone wanted to be an independent consultant, but for the long run. But if they also wanted to come back, they also could. And I can also
Mm.
speak with some authority because I did consulting. Okay, if I take a step back, I was a founder, then did
Yes.
consulting. So that's a shift. And from consulting, I moved to a corporate, and then from a corporate to a more kind of startup type environment. So you could actually shift between because your skills, your learnings, your network, most of it is kind of fluid and transferable in that sense, right? So you can
Absolutely.
transfer between different spaces, if you like.
No,
All right.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that transferability is what I guess a professional need to build in that sense. Whether you are a consultant, whether you are an employee, whether you are a founder, you are actually the same person, but performing and behaving in a slightly different environment.
Yes.
All right, going back to the questions, what was the first project you took up post your corporate life? How did you get it, and what tipped the scale in your favor?
So I actually, while I was speaking, I spoke about it. I think the first one I got was I wrote to somebody on LinkedIn I'd known 10 years ago. And interestingly, not related to what I did at that point. And so this was just more of an open call and saying, hey, I'm looking for projects and I would love to chat with you. And I had a friend who worked at that organization who said, hey, they're looking for people, not exactly you, but in the ballpark. Why don't you reach out to the person in charge? And I think in that case is I believe it was the references that worked, right? Like nobody was really looking at my CV or my compensation or what I'd done. Like there were I'm sure 100 other people who looked much better on paper. But there were within the person who was hiring at least 4 or 5 people who knew me really well. Right. The person who was, who I was going to replace, who was earlier a staff member and now they were getting in a consultant. Other people who probably were, gotten for my background check. And I think that really made a difference, right? So that first layer, the person who referred me and the person who probably reached out for background check. Like, independent consultant all about, can somebody trust you as a person? Your resume is exciting, but it's not as relevant as who will vouch for you.
Right, thank you. The next question, Charu, is instability in projects really that big a deal in this age of corporate layoffs?
Instability. So instability is a personal thing. And I think I'll maybe a good example is one of my closest friends, right? I think she left corporate life about 10 years ago, mostly because she was moving from India to the US. There was all kinds of work visa issues. Uh, but she always looks at stability and saying, do I have enough to keep myself busy? Right? Because she's not looking at it from a financial lens. But for her, a lot of other things are important, right? Like, is it hitting the quality of work I want to do? Is this the right kind of people I want to be with? So, so for in her construct, stability is the nature of work. For a lot of us, stability is financial, right? And I said this at the starting point. When I started off, I wasn't in the crunch situation, right? Like this wasn't, if I took this plunge, it was not impacting my lifestyle. This was more of a choice of quality of life. So I came from a position of privilege and luxury. I recognize in this environment that is not the case, right? You can be at many different places. You can be at different places in your lifetime. Um, So I think stability, instability is a little bit of a personal thing. The one I think reflection I have is if you're much earlier in your career, independent consulting is going to be much harder. There are much fewer, right, people who know you and your work. There's also a smaller core value, right? So your ability to shift, you might be a really good learner, and we all need to be, but your ability to be, dropped in and start working, that has its constraints, right? Just as I couldn't do what I do today 10 years ago. Right? Over those 10 years, somebody taught me this world. So think of it in your context, but instability is a hard one these days.
Yes. The next one, I guess, is connected in some ways. Was there a financial hit when you transitioned? If yes, how did you convince yourself that the financial hit was worth it?
So I think there was a financial hit. I actually left money on the table when I left my last employer. Um, it was a couple of things. For me, the move was quite personal. I wanted to spend more time with my children. And it's just what I was getting in return was hard to quantify financially, but it wasn't a hit on my lifestyle. Right. So it might, there is, that ego moment where like, oh my God, I'm like XYZ in this organization and now I'm going to be nobody. I think that's a mental model or mental transition that took a while, right? So being in that position of authority, of privilege, if you walked into an office, people knew who you were. If you got onto a call, people would listen to you because of, what your designation said, to being like a nobody in the room. I think that for me was much harder. Um, Also because I think it was the first time in like all my career, right? I had never had to introduce myself before this, right? So a lot of those were much harder. The financial one, not as hard, mostly because it wasn't something of a lifestyle for them. I think the other one, which helped, is actually having a partner who said, we can figure this out. Right. And that this is, if this matters to you, then let's just do this. So I think it's also our careers aren't individual, right? They impact everybody who's attached to us, our partners, our family. So I think a lot of that comfort kind of, we can figure this out, makes a lot of difference in some of those jumps.
Right, right. I have few more questions to cover, so I'll go a little faster, Charu. Do I need to have a unique skill to start consulting? Uh, is in this bad labor market, how do I stand out? Is starting small necessarily short selling myself?
So not unique, but you need to have a sellable skill. And I think this goes back to what Yasser said. If he and I went out and said we are public policy professionals, nobody would know what to do with us. But the moment we pitched ourselves as we can solve for your partnership issue, we can build your pipeline, we can expand your network in this XYZ country, people know how to think of us in their construct. And I think that's what is unique. Can you help your future client visualize yourself in their ecosystem? Which is why first layer helps, because you actually know how the client works, right? It's going to be very hard to have a cold call with somebody and be able to know what that organization does. So I think the uniqueness is really the ability to help your employer see, or your future clients see, why you're valuable to them.
Thank you. And the question from Samihan is that what has been your strategy to build a steady sales funnel? Purely word of mouth, referrals, or networking, or having a social media strategy, or a mix of all?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of unique to the kind of work you do. I think what I do is it's a very narrow market. Everybody knows everybody by the end of 1 year. So a lot of it has been word of mouth. But I think when I think of as a portfolio, it's like, what all do I do? I think there's been like a lot of the volunteering work I do was cold calls. It was essentially saying, hey, I need to get into this because I need to learn. Uh, which is back to it, right? I'm not looking for another anchor. So I'm not trying to build one after the other, lots of projects. But I'm trying to see what complements what I do already. And so for some of the others, I've applied, I've gone through RFP processes. I have done interviewing or other things. Social media isn't really my market isn't constructed like that. I think for many others, it might be. But buying not as much. I know friends, for example, who've done, for example, if you're in communications, they have created really strong own LinkedIn profiles, etc., to be able to say, hey, see if we could do this for you. So it's a little bit of what your skill is.
Right.
In my case, it's I think the value of my skill is nobody knowing what the skill is. But I think for me, a majority of it has been through referrals, but referrals of all kind, right? So kind of below at the bottom and filling up an online form to like knowing the CEO and asking them.
Right, right. If I may add something, I have seen consultants who are pretty active on LinkedIn as well. So to build that sales funnel that
Yeah.
Samihan was talking about, and LinkedIn is pretty useful in that sense. Obviously, depends on the type of work you do, and being active there and being seen in the market for that type of work does
Yeah.
get traction. And I've also seen communities like WhatsApp communities, etc., where people do talk about their expertise, and that also attracts them to work for their kind of area.
Yeah, and also collaborators. I don't know if that
Right.
works the best. So I have friends, for example, who do say they do marketing and somebody else does X, Y, Z, and they're essentially
Yeah.
part of this. Like if you pitch all of us together,
Right.
right? So you almost come as a consulting group, but you function as like
Right.
one entity.
Mm, right. And Saurabh's question is, hi, thanks for wonderful session. In case you want to attract clients in not your own circles, rather fresh and new areas or segments, how should we go about it? I guess this is going out of the circles.
So I think the first is discoverability, right? How do they know you exist? And then that's where maybe social media comes into play in, say, my domain. A lot of that depends on, are you sitting on events and panels, right? Are you participating, or are you seen as a voice within that space? I think a little bit of this is also around like seniority. You're the kind of projects I pitch for, it's unlikely somebody is going to like look at my LinkedIn and say, okay, let's hire this person. They would probably need to say, okay, did she write an op-ed about it? Is she considered a voice in this space? Has she done some, so I think if you're going beyond your circle, you're trying to solve for discoverability and you're trying to solve for credibility. So people know you exist and people know you're good at it. And so a lot more of the more traditional, right? Do you sit on a board? Do you have you written an op-ed? Are you considered an advisor or a mentor? These things kind of help build some of that.
Well, yeah, as work increases and having a team for certain types of projects helps, how do you see the option for formats that consultants can follow? What seems to work and any red flags?
Yeah, so
Thank you,
that's
Purnima.
definitely a route, right? And that's, I think, as you think of like traditional consulting, right? So if you're trying to set up HR consulting, you want one after the other similar projects. There's almost that break in saying, okay, this client facing always I have to do, but all of this processing, I can maybe get people to do it. Um, I think the not a red flag, but I think the what to know over there is who do you add, right? I think the tendency is if I have doubled it, then my volumes should double. That really never happens, right? When you double people, you actually become 1.5 if you double the right way. But I think understanding the role that you will always have to play, because in consulting, it's very much a personal brand, right? Like even when you think of the BCGs and McKinseys, people hire like specific partners because they know that person will bring a certain kind of intellectual rigor into work. So there's always going to be something that you will do, and therefore understanding what is that complementarity, right? That some if somebody else did will not impact the final quality.
Charu, given the type of work you do, is this usually work that you go into an office, or do you usually work from home? Like, what's the mix like?
I work mostly virtual. I have
Okay,
one piece of work where I go in person, I teach, but other than mostly virtual and some travel.
right. Thank you. The last question in the Q&A thread is, do individual consultants have much bargaining or pricing power?
Not much. But for a couple of reasons, I think. So maybe to place it better, right? don't do a project that's below your what you think you're worth, or what your work should be worth, because I think that does not have the right kind of outcomes if you're doing it for financial reasons. um the reason there is limited bargaining is because I think most of consulting work kind of comes with, like these preset budgets where there's some amount available for something. So it's not like somebody has a, pool of money from which you're getting X, but really there's already a line item of which you are getting certain. So it's just more of, I think, the way I've seen organizations hire people and where they get hired. Um, so that for, and this is again, right, in my construct, this is really when you think of your anchor purely financial product. I think I know people who do independent consulting when they're kind of looking at equity, like they, go away with doing, so a lot of people who consult with startups, they tend to look at much more negotiation power over there. But I think when you think of more independent, structured, and see large organizations, much lesser over there because of just how budgets, etc., are structured.
We had a chat a couple of months ago with Grace Clapham, who you would also know. She's also building a consulting practice, and she spoke about this value. And then she also did talk about this line item because there's a budget, and if you want to do that work, then you have to fit into that line item, and the budget is set. But
Mm.
then at the same time, she also spoke about projects, especially in the marketing growth kind of areas where there's a little more room. And then you could actually bargain better for your value rather than for the time you spend or for a budget that came along with it. And in
Absolutely.
that case, the value actually plays a role as well.
No, absolutely. Like, I just someone, yeah, I know. She said my daily, I fee is from like 75, $750 to $2,000, which is the 2,000 really comes in for when somebody needs my brand. Me showing up matters versus just my skill. So that ranged, I think, definitely, like depending on where and what your client is looking for.
Right. Last 2 minutes, Charu, I know you mentioned your family and children a couple of times, and this was also a personal choice in that sense, so that you can spend more time with the family. And I know you have two twins, 7 years old now.
Yes.
Um, and has this actually helped you have more time to spend with them? Like usually, if you're in a job, you work maybe 40 hours or 45 hours, could be more, could be less. But like, are you able to manage like you do less hours? The reason I also ask is sometimes some freelancers say like you can't say no, the work keeps coming. I guess this is not so much in your domain, but if someone's working on platforms and then they don't also want to say no to work because that could also affect the algorithm, right? So they take on work, and then although you wanted flexibility in the first place, you actually end up working 60 hours, 70 hours a week. So would like to just talk about your personal side as well, like how do you manage with family uh, and work in this context.
So actually, interesting, my husband pointed this out. He's like, I think I do more hours now than I ever did in the job.
Oh, really?
Um,
Okay.
but I think there's a flexibility component to it, which is, I think, very undervalued, right? So you all meals with family. But if you're working, you never have any meal, right? Because you're running late at breakfast, you're in office at lunch, and then dinner is like this really random mix of like getting everybody into bed. Um, so I think, which is back to like the first point, right? Like you have to consciously say, you know what, this is lunchtime, nothing doing. This is lunchtime for me. And there's a lot more flexibility can give you, right? An hour at night is way more productive than like 4 hours in the day. In my line of work where you're trying to like get things done, or it's like not so much as getting onto like 100 calls, but you're an individual delivering is that. So it definitely helps with the flexibility part. It does allow you to do more out of those 24 hours because it breaks those silos, right? Like we've all like sat in office where you're like, why am I having lunch here? We're like these people I don't know. So you definitely don't have those moments.
Yeah, over time, but there's one last question that just came in,
Sure.
and I think it's just a one-word answer that's requested here, so I'll still ask that. Has consulting been better than a corporate for you overall? One word answer.
Absolutely. So,
Okay.
and this I can answer. When I joined, I said I
Right.
will not do this more than 1 year. I'm in three,
Okay.
I'm going into four. So it's obviously been better.
Right.
It's also my longest stint so far in any one thing.
Right. Right. All right, Charu, thank you very much for your frank sharing. I guess very well structured in the first half, and then we had a lot of discussions, lots of questions today as well, and hope we've answered all of them. And Charu can be contacted. She's on LinkedIn. If someone wants to drop me a message, I'm happy to connect Charu as well. And thank you again, Charu, for all your answers. I'm just checking the chat thread. Samihan just sent a message. Wonderful listening to you, Charu, and great conversation. Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Samihan. Thank you, everyone who asked questions. Thank you, everyone who joined as well. And we will meet you again next week as well. See you.
Thank you, SS.
Bye.